Okay, episode 4, we've made it to the last one, and we are both narrowing our scope of the topic maybe, but we are broadening it to our audience. We would love this to reach educators and also parents, and for a couple of reasons. Primarily because we want people to be more augmenting in their sexual education. We are communities teaching our kids. We are not just one parent educating our kids. We're not just one teacher educating our kids. We're systems and communities teaching our kids about how to feel about themselves, how to be in the world, how to be in relationship. And in that context, we have incredible opportunity to be sharing resources with our kids' teachers to update their curriculum around sex ed. It depends what school district you're in. It depends what is being endorsed in that culture, in that environment, in that district, in that school, by that teacher, what they're comfortable with, and just inviting us to have those hard conversations with one another from adult to adult to make sure that we are moving and we are changing and we too are developing in our understanding of how to be caring, wise, healthy, and inclusive in the way we educate our kids. And so Ashton's going to walk us through some pieces here of that I think are going to be really relevant to classroom education around sex and body ed, but also about helping parents remember the way we use language and also to how to invite our teachers into conversations about, can we be doing this differently so that my kid has a better understanding and a more updated understanding of how we're going to have these conversations and what's relevant to them. Sex ed now is not what sex ed was. It should not be now what it was even 5-10 years ago. So this is going to help. We consider this the tool we are just giving you to be able to sit down with what you currently teach and ask yourself some questions through the lens of what Ashton's going to hand to you today. So, okay, you shoot, you go. What do you want teachers to do differently? What do you want people to know or think through?
Yeah. So
yeah,
I think the first thing I do is I just want to I want to affirm and I want to recognize how much teachers are doing for us and how much our educational assistants are doing for us and how sometimes little time there feels in a curriculum or in a day to tackle some of these things. So I do have a very full appreciation that there's a lot of things to do on a Pro D day.
That's
My hope is that that by talking about some of this, it will encourage and it will support some of those teachers and those educators to know where they could go to do that, because it can be equally as overwhelming. When I have worked with teachers and when I have spoken to them in the past, like some of the general concerns are, I look at these kids every single day. I see them every single day. And so if we deliver information or we're asking questions and we're having these conversations in a way and someone discloses something to me, like after the fact, I want to be an askable adult, but it would also be great if perhaps we bring in an educator. So I want to recognize the role that people like myself play, where we do know that things are changing and things are changing very quickly. Things are changing around language and how we present. And we spend a lot of time practicing how we deliver information to make sure that it is inclusive. And while I would hope that that's part of a teacher's practice in general, it is wildly overwhelming for sure. So 2 things that I would always like to note is that, where we are, we do have SOGI. So that is a resource for teachers for sure and educators. And we're also really fortunate to have OPT. So having Options for Sexual Health, which is, our Canadian Planned Parenthood, they are incredible supporters and proponents, both as having educators that can come in to support this, but also in training for teachers and for educators themselves. So know right off the start of this episode, I know you do so much, educators. And I just want to provide some tips or some things for us to be thinking about that are themes that we've also been talking with our families, because they do come together to complement each other. So the role of educators, or at least I can speak from my perspective as an educator, is that we are very specific to our curriculum. We are very specific in the topics that we cover and the things that we cover. It may look different in terms of the kinds of lessons that we provide, but we are pretty, we stick very closely to developmental guidelines and to what is deemed appropriate based on the school curriculum.
Okay.
So what I would say to families is, if you get a letter that says a sexual health educator is going to be coming in to talk to your kids, please know that we won't be teaching your children values or how to interpret this information within their family systems. We will just be giving the facts. And so I would encourage teachers as well, because they are supporting our youth in so many ways. Know that when it does come to sexual health education, it really is okay to provide just the facts. When you don't know, it's also okay to say, let's find out. And it's very, very important that you're working with the families so that the families can continue and be in the loop with where their kids are getting this information.
Yeah.
So there's that. To start, I don't think this is going to be surprising to our listeners, Karen, but I believe that it should be inclusive. There's that word again.
Well,
I'd
like to think that's not a surprise, but okay.
Yeah. But we'll say it. We'll say
Okay.
it. The theme is inclusivity. So
Yes.
gone are the days of separating students on assigned sex or assumed sex and teaching them only what might be relevant to male or female. We don't do that anymore. I don't know when exactly this has stopped, but at least in my own experience, I know this didn't happen. I know that I had all gendered comprehensive sexual health education, but I have heard from my friends that that is not the case across the board. So please don't separate assumed gender of children. Children need to know about all the aspects and how it affects all bodies across the board in order to create just like a general understanding. So some of the ways I would suggest doing this and some of the examples that I have are, whenever possible, try to use like gender neutral names, maybe like Sam or Taylor. When we have education sessions with the littles and we use, say, like an anatomically correct doll when we're teaching body parts, one of the things that I love is having just a gender neutral name. So there isn't any preconceived idea, or I'm not layering that.
You're not creating that.
I'm not.
Okay.
Yeah. Which is what I love. So I would think piggybacking kind of off of that idea would be examples of modeling both heterosexual and cis orientations. So making sure that we're also including they, them pronouns. And when we're referring to bodies, we're not referring to boy and girl bodies, or we would refer to a body with a penis or a body with a vulva. We're not going to assign gender to bodies. We just know that some bodies are going to have a penis and some bodies are going to have a vulva. Most bodies, let's hope all bodies have an anus, and that's inclusive.
So like more, it's descriptive, not labeled.
Yes. 100%.
We're not adding a label. We're describing. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Making.
I think that's big though. Is that happening? Is that how
it's starting to?
Really?
Yeah. It's starting to. Yeah.
Okay.
Like I said, it's difficult. It's difficult. I think I was sharing a story with you one time about how I was using they, them pronoun, they, their pronouns in a work capacity because I wasn't sure about the gender of the individual. And I have just been making a better practice of trying to use that when I don't know, because people can share with me what their pronouns are. And I was like, there was some pushback about how they felt it was ambiguous. And so I think what we can also be doing is starting that younger, and hearing that would help us to implement it ourselves or to understand what that
it's not yet normalized for us. That's right. So it takes some effort to rethink how we're going to language that. Yeah.
Yeah. And especially when we're talking about those littles, because it's not going to be the time to start talking about gender identity or things like that. But just by simply using, pronouns that way can really start to shape an understanding, a foundation for them once they get to the developmentally appropriate time.
Okay.
So we want to remove assumptions about values or orientation. So that's another big layer of
Okay.
inclusivity. So making statements when we can. So something, for example, like this is Sam. Sam has a crush on a fellow student. They might have been hanging out for quite a bit, and Sam is pretty confident that they like them back. Sam would like to explore this relationship further. What does this feel like, look like, or sound like? So that example, we don't know the gender, and we don't know the gender that Sam is attracted to. So this provides a huge
Yeah, it's
expanse,
wide open. Yeah.
wide open for youth to see themselves in this
Okay. In the
example.
narrative. Good. Yeah.
Yes. Another example of language like this might be Taylor is interested in having a sexual relationship with Jamie, and they have already been dancing and making out at parties. When thinking about consent, what should Taylor be aware of? Obviously, the answer is getting an enthusiastic yes.
Throwback
Um,
to episode 1.
But we might also say, as we're talking about these, this is more developmentally for teens. So as an
Yeah.
educator, I might say something like, is Jamie under the influence? And remember,
Yeah.
folks can't give consent when impaired.
The
And
factors.
so,
That's right.
yes. And so using language too, like folks, to take out any specific gendered notion
Yeah.
of what is happening in this scenario so that our youth can see themselves in these examples, and then it's
Yeah.
more applicable to them. I think is really, really important. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, okay. I was thinking about the complementary nature of what happens in the classroom around education, and then the expansion of what needs to happen at home. And I kind of think, yeah, like I think I would urge parents to remember that because it's covered in school, even if it's really thoroughly covered in school, that isn't like a phew, I don't need to. That
Yeah.
we need to remember the what is actually being covered in school.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think it comes across half the time to parents as it's only like super biological factual. Like I know that that's the bulk of it, but I think we believe that there's some context to the relationship nuance stuff that happens in those conversations too when you're trying to have dialogue, particularly with like preteens into teenager years, that kids are starting to ask questions, not just about their changing bodies, but just about how the interaction piece. And that parents should remember the value that they add
Oh yeah.
to 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 that layer of the dialogue, and that timing should matter. So if I know that I'm getting that letter home
Mm-hmm.
this term, for my daughter, I'm going to try and time that with the added module information, right? Like that they're covering one part and I've got the parent module. The parent module is going to look value add, right? It's going to
Yeah.
be the other stuff about what does this mean for
Mm-hmm.
your life right
Yeah.
now? What does this mean for the crush that you have? What does this
Mm-hmm.
mean for how you're going to, what you need to pack in your bag for the locker room, what you're going to need in case you get your period for the first time
Yeah.
and you're in school. And because those are not things that
Yeah.
are being covered in school. So
Yeah.
the real life implementation of that biological factual knowledge, kids can't figure that out on their own. And I think that's where so much of the shame grows, is
Mm-hmm.
they walk out of the classroom thinking I should now know this, or all the other kids must know this, and
Mm-hmm.
nobody talks about it. And then they get caught off guard and they feel embarrassed, and then they wrap their shirt around their waist and they're right. Like I had a
Mm-hmm.
beautiful phone call from a teacher who from one of our admin in our school for our daughter, saying, she's complaining of a stomach ache. She's at the office. She's asking for this. I'd love to support her and make her feel really comfortable. it's unclear, but I am wondering, and I'm curious if maybe she's getting her period for the first time. And so I offered her, I offered her something from the Lost and Found if she wanted to. I didn't. She's like, I didn't point it out, and I didn't ask her if that's what was happening, but I offered the things that just in case that's what was happening would make her feel more comfortable to get through the next part of the day. She's not wanting to go home. So, and just that, like that, I don't know, exchange made me as a parent feel confident that there's eyes on that are caring
Yeah.
and not just about the biology, right? About the
Yeah.
social construct that sits around this experience for her, potentially. And are we aligned in how we're going to carry
Yes.
this over? And then when she came home, turns out that's not what was happening.
Mm-hmm.
And yet that cued me to go, you know what, that could be a thing that happens. And so I'm going to say, if this ever feels like this again and you're worried, that's a safe caring adult at that admin office that you can go to because she knows what to do.
Yeah.
Similar to what I would do if you were at home and this happened, right? And so what would you like to carry with you in case it does? And what's that experience going to be like for you, do you think? What would you worry about? None
Mm-hmm.
of that would have happened, right? Without that
Yeah.
cue of, and I thought that was so the timing of this, like we are in this together, educating our kids in a very whole way, not just in a categorical way. So big.
Yeah. Yeah. And that it can be both complementary in
Yeah.
exactly how you just described it. And I think touching on your earlier point, when I go into a school, sometimes they might get me once. So that might be for one
Yeah.
grade. That
That's
doesn't
right.
mean that they're asking us or they have the ability to have us come in for all of the different ages and that they are
Mm-hmm.
getting it consistently. Like
Mm-hmm.
that's part of the struggle as well for teachers is what do they know? What did they learn
Yeah.
last year? What is the basis of knowledge that we're coming into this with? How do I keep it about the facts? But how do I
Right.
also come along with these young people and not knowing what they don't know at home? We
Yeah.
don't know. So I
That's
think when
right.
we're modeling some of these examples and we're trying to be particularly inclusive, we don't know what the values are going to be
Mm-hmm.
when the children leave, and we do need
That's right.
to open ourselves up. This is probably like a bigger conversation too, but we
Mm-hmm.
educators have a really wonderful role to be that safe place if that support is not available at home as
At
well.
home. That's right. Yeah.
Yes. And that's
Yeah.
not, I don't mean to say that in a judgment because I really do want to
No.
empower parents to know that they do get to do that. They get to decide how this information
Yeah.
lands at home, but sometimes in an
Yeah.
absence of that, children may or youth may get an idea of how something might land and not
Yeah.
be sure and then feel
Yeah.
unsafe. So
That's right.
I do think schools are doing a pretty good job of this. I think that there has been a big turn in the last little while
Mm.
for this kind of inclusivity to start happening. It's just tricky in that we don't we don't realize how gendered we often are. We don't realize how, cis hetero we are. We don't realize
Yeah.
how nuclear we are when we're talking about
Mhm.
families.
That's right.
That's a huge
That's a
conversation
big one.
about,
Yeah.
like about the
Yep.
patriarchy and how information has come down and bleh. Like
Yes.
that's a whole thing. So
Yeah.
knowing that both for your educators and then for people like myself, we don't always get to spend as much time as we would like
That's right. Yeah.
with
It
your
is
kids.
within its limits. Yeah.
You
Yeah.
may not get a letter because it is part of the curriculum. So
Right.
teachers covering this, you may not know when they are going to be covering it in the curriculum. So
Mhm.
it's hard to know if they are going to come home and have follow-up questions with you.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
those conversations at the dinner table of, what did you learn at school today? Let's hope that they are going to feel comfortable to disclose that they received some comprehensive sexual health education, so that
Yep.
as a family you can decide how to speak more about that, how to implement that. So yeah, it's so I'm so happy that your daughter had that experience. I think like it
Me
really,
too.
I do think we've come a long way. I
Yeah.
think that I think that at the end of the day, for the people that I know that are educators, it's just that there's so much that they're trying to do. There's
That's right.
just so much. And
Yeah.
I know that they're trying. So any of these like small tips or things, I'm just really
Mhm.
thankful for the educators who are also being those change leaders, those,
Yeah.
I'm just so grateful. Um, thinking about biology, thinking about how it's probably easy, you would think, to slip in human biology into a biology class. But I think I think that something that we might neglect to do in our honest attempt to talk about reproduction in its most factual sense,
Yeah.
which is sperm meeting an egg,
Yes.
creating new cells, creating new life, implanting into a body of a uterus
Mm-hmm.
within, that kind of concept, is that we may forget to talk about all the ways in which people are created.
Yeah.
So I would love it if we were also just talking about how that there might be medical support, or that just to normalize the experiences of not everyone is going to have penis and vagina sex that results in conception of a child. So
Yep.
I would like to see that there be a little bit more of a shift to us just saying, like, yes, we know this happens, but do we know all of the different ways that it can happen, so that families also come in many different ways? Because I think what can happen is that we don't see that diversity
Mm-hmm.
of family apart from a mummy and a daddy loves each other and
That's
then we
right.
had a
Yeah.
baby.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it is really important for kids to be able to identify that you could have same-sex parents. You could be adopted. You could be
Yeah.
supported because I'm thinking of a very dear friend who has a medical condition where she's not going to be able to carry her own child, and they
Mm-hmm.
had a surrogate. And
Yeah.
I would love for children to see and normalize all of the different ways, and all the different ways in which this occurs, and then
Yeah.
all of the different kinds of families that we could be living in, so that is also, people aren't feeling excluded if they don't
Mm-hmm.
have
Mm-hmm.
a mummy to go talk to, or
When they don't fit the template. Yeah.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. Just more
Yeah.
opportunities for them to see themselves in the information that they are being given. I think is
Well, and
incredibly
isn't that the
empowering.
thing? Because the ages that we're teaching these kids are the ages developmentally where they are quite egocentric. It is about them. So they're
Yes.
trying to place themselves in whatever story's being told. They're trying
Yes.
to make it relevant to them.
Mhm.
So you might think I'm just giving a generic map and go ahead and adapt it however you need to understand this information, this biological information. But at the end of the day, that kid's absorbing that, trying to figure out how do I fit that story?
Certainly. And as an educator,
How do I fit that?
we're not telling them how we
No,
feel about
that's
same
right.
sex marriage or any of these,
Yeah. Yeah.
values based
Right.
things. We're just providing an opportunity for them to fit in the template. They
Yes.
will be able to explore that with their own families, or explore that on their own to make their own decisions about how they feel, because they're autonomous in doing that in their own sexual journey, in
Yeah.
their human sexuality. Whereas for us, let's just make it the most inclusive template we can, so all children see themselves and they're forming a
Find
sense of
themselves in it.
identity that's
That's right.
true to
Yeah.
them. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Um,
Amazing.
and then I also think, Karen, about the conversation we had last time. So I think episode
Mhm.
3, which was really making sure that we're not forgetting about folks with disabilities and different abilities. Actually want to take out that I even said disabilities, because it's in my
Okay.
practice to always say differing
Yeah.
abilities,
Differently. Okay.
differently abled.
Abled. Okay.
Yeah. So making sure that we don't forget about those folks with just different abilities,
Mhm.
including examples of developmental disabilities, is just as important when teaching inclusive sexual health education. It could be a physical disability, so
Yeah.
making sure that we know that people, even though they appear different, still have the same wants and desires and needs.
Yeah.
Um,
Their bodies
and
change. All
yeah,
of those things are still happening. Yeah. Yeah.
and normalize, if you're giving an example, normalize an able-bodied person dating someone that's differently
Yeah.
abled,
Yeah.
because that's a very real possibility. And if we stopped feeling so quirky and sticky and unsure, and
Yeah.
really pulled back to the value that can have on
Yeah.
people really being seen and being validated within their
Mhm.
community as having equal I don't want to use the word.
Opportunity,
Yeah,
access. Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so if we do that all the time, we're not even going to begin to think that it's abnormal.
Mhm.
Where does abnormal come from? If we see that all the time, we're just going to assume that there are so many possibilities, and we are not going to limit our expression
Pigeonholed
of
into, that's
yes,
right. We don't have to
yeah,
then
of
resist
sexuality.
this fight with the idea of how is this possible that I have feelings for someone when that wasn't. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah,
It makes it
yeah,
all okay. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
completely. Yeah. So those would be some of my tips on inclusion. And you
Yeah.
don't have to do it just with sexual health curriculum. Like there are a
Right.
lot of ways in which we can, perhaps in a history class when we are talking about, um, suffrage, there's an opportunity there to have a quick sidebar discussion on gender or power dynamics or some
Yeah.
of these other things, so that it's sprinkled, it's
Mhm.
sprinkled in throughout,
Mhm.
so that we're constantly providing opportunities for our youth to think about that in a different way.
Yeah.
So just knowing and empowering our teachers in that way, also they're doing a good job. Like,
Mhm.
thank you. You're doing
Mhm.
a
Right?
really good job.
Yeah.
Um, and I appreciate it now even more.
Hmm.
Trying to I only educate on this part of it. I could only
Yeah.
imagine what it takes to educate on everything. So it is
Yeah.
big props and big thank you to the people who are doing that work for us. And I encourage so much for our families to just be involved, to know what your kid is learning, and being prepared to know how you want to follow up on that.
Yeah. Oh, beautifully put. You, Ashton, covered so much in 4 episodes, but I'm so grateful for how digestible you made that and how applicable you made that and how warm you kept the conversation to us remembering that we are all working our best here. We're all doing our
Mhm.
best. We have complex lives that we're navigating.
Mhm.
Our kids are complicated. Sex is complicated.
Yeah.
So our bodies are complicated. So yeah, I mean, with all of that thrown into the pot, I thought this was such a meaningful um, series to do to gift to us parents that are often feeling at different stages of the journey like we hit a roadblock or we feel like we're
Mhm.
fumbling or we need some reassurance from someone like
Mhm.
you where it's okay, we're on the right track, not too late, you can go back, you can redo. All of that I found so forgiving and helpful and has left me feeling more clear about what I want to be able to proactively have conversations with
Mhm.
my own kids about and
Mhm.
what to gain comfort in for myself and maybe give myself permission to explore more.
Mhm.
It
Yeah.
matters. Things that I may have dismissed as not mattering, I might think that they matter.
Yeah.
So, thank
And
you.
thank you. Thank you so much. I appreciate you providing me the chance to speak in this way. And there are so many great resources out there, and it can be really easy to find handouts and worksheets. And I'm so looking forward to sharing some of those. I know we can put some of them in the show notes and
You
in the different
will.
places that they
Yeah.
find resources from you. Um,
Yeah.
One of the things that I'd like to point out for families right away is that there is a really great book called Sex Positive Talks to Have with Kids, a guide to raising
Great.
sexually healthy, informed, empowered young people, that's come out through sex positive families. There are
Okay.
also a couple of really great websites. It's changing. The information that's available out there is really there for you. Thank you so much for giving me a chance to talk to parents about how we can take that information and support the young people in our lives.
Yay. Thank
Yay.
you. Thank
Thank you
you.
so
Now
much.
hit publish and get it out to people because I need to hear this. So good.
Oh,
Thanks,
thank you.
Ashton.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Have a good evening.
Bye.